Hey everyone, welcome to this morning's podcast. We're broadcasting live on the TuneIn network. We are also broadcasting live via YouTube. Not sure if we have any viewers. This is one of the first times we're trying this. But for now on, if you guys like to listen live, might as well pull up YouTube. Check us out on youtube.com/Paradigm Life. I'm joined here with Brad Gibb. Brad, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
It's a beautiful summer day.
Yep.
Here in the West.
Since we got video, we had to do the.
I know I haven't seen you in ties very often.
No.
But we've been broadcasting for 8 years now.
Yeah.
And nine years, and we have a lot of different material online in relation to our podcast. So definitely check that out. We are trying to go more of a professional route with the podcast and the radio show, and so Brad's been taking voice lessons and
me.
No, but we'd love to do this podcast. It's an incredible way to get our philosophy out there, our financial philosophy. We're grateful for all the many thousands and thousands of listeners that we have. We've gotten some feedback in the last little bit on some of the topics that we've discussed. We're going to be addressing that today. But before we do that, we'd like to invite you to check out our various resources online. We've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money on basically taking our very, I would say, unorthodox, unconventional financial advising and planning methods and putting them online. And instead of having the need to discuss these different strategies and techniques with a person one-on-one, we felt it would be appropriate for people to learn at their own pace, learn for themselves, do self-discovery. And so we've created a lot of different tutorials and audio programs, webinars. So you can go check that out at paradigmlife.net. That's PARADIGMLIFE.net. We have a free e-learning program called Infinite 101. And also for you real estate investors or just investors in general that are out there, we have a e-learning program called beyourbank.com. And you can go to that website, register for free, and check out how our services relate to the real estate investor or investor in general. Also, we're pretty active on social media. Yesterday, we actually had an interview that I did with Fundrise.com. Fundrise is a company that I do some personal investments with, and they are out of Washington, D.C., but have offices in New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, and are really blazing the trail when it comes to crowdfunding, and they have just an incredible platform. Their principals are some of the most intelligent guys that I know, and the way in which they're able to get into these multi-million dollar real estate developments and deals is fascinating. And it's definitely a cool thing to check out. So check out the interview that I did with them, and it's on our blog, or also our social medias. You can go to Facebook and follow us, but also on our blog. And you can also check out Fundrise. They have a really, really cool blog that's very active. They're very up on social media, and definitely encourage you to follow them. They are, in a sense, kind of like us. We're blazing the trail with different ways to, different ways to do things financially. And I think the crowdfunding thing is fascinating. It's turning Wall Street on its heels, which is far overdue, I would say.
Yep.
So check that out. Anyway, and in social media, we're always, we're blogging a couple times a week. If you ever want to ask questions, definitely reach out to us there. We also have a website or email address specifically for the podcast. It's podcast@paradigmlife.net. Send us your questions, feedback. Leave us some good feedback on iTunes as well. That definitely helps our rankings. Since we've been doing the show every week, we're in the top 50 podcasts when it comes to business, which is really cool. So thanks for that. Give us your ratings, give us your feedback. We're always trying to improve this. I mean, so half the time I'm like, what am I doing? So we're not professionals, but we love feedback because that helps us become more proficient, more clear, more eloquent in the way in which we explain our philosophy.
Well, and we'd love all the questions we can get too, because sometimes even this morning we're like, what do we want to talk about? And we were kicking ideas around, and the more feedback we can get on what we need to go more in depth on, and I particularly like the podcast because it really gives us a broad range of, we cover a pretty broad range of topics.
Sure.
So any questions you've got related to anything financial, send them our way, and we'll work on answering them and going through them and using that to kind of form what we're going to talk about in these sessions.
Yeah, because it's, and this is just being frank and open. But when I was on the phone yesterday with a colleague that's not in our office, doesn't work with our company, but uses a very similar mindset as we do and a set of financial principles, and we were talking, and we came down to, because in the financial planning world, you have all sorts of different sales systems, and these are systems created by third parties, and modern portfolio theory and asset allocation models. You also have insurance type of strategies, and I basically told him, I said, listen, I'm not. All I care about is what's true and what works. I don't care with the software that we use, which is called Truth Concepts. We want to come down to what works and what doesn't, what's true and what's not. We don't like hyperbole. We don't like conjecture. We don't like, we're all about doing what is best for somebody, and we are the first to say that we don't know everything, but we're always seeking to know as much as possible, because the more we know, the more we can help people. And so your feedback is huge for us. If we say something that you don't believe is true, let us know, and maybe we can explain it better, or maybe it is untrue. I don't know.
Right.
But we want to come to what is true and what's not, what's a good core, rock solid financial principle, and what's not. We've come to discover, you came from a different industry, I came from a different industry. All of our advisors here at Paradigm Life, we've all come from various industries, and we've figured out this truth. And that's what we're trying to convey to people through our philosophy, through this podcast, through our videos, and so forth.
And that's why I think we sort of shrug off a lot of the normal sales systems. We don't have a black box we're going to take and type your numbers into, and then it spits out an answer, because nobody's finances work that way. What we try to do is we try to take the principles that we've learned and discovered and then apply them to each person's scenario. That's why we like you mentioned, Truth Concepts is very flexible. It's let's just put the numbers in and see what it tells us and how this all works, and discover the principles and make sure that we're applying them correctly. And I was telling this to a client the other day as well. I've done hundreds and hundreds of cases, and collectively we've done thousands of cases, and I've never had two look the same. It's meant to be, and that's the way your finances ought to be run. Yours shouldn't look like anybody else's. And so we're not trying to fit people into a box and say everybody ought to have these specific allocations regardless of who you are. It's what principles are there, and what are you trying to accomplish, and let's chart the best path to get there.
Yeah, and I know, and it's these are hard conversations, and because it's a person's money, and it's one of the things that you don't discuss at the cocktail party. Religion, politics, and money. Right. But the thing at the same time, it's one of the things that people spend the majority of their time doing. What
do people talk about at cocktail parties then, if they don't talk about those three things?
To the Kardashians. I don't know, but my point is, we are amidst a economic shift that most people are just oblivious to finances in general, let alone the different moving parts and what those moving parts are saying. But you and I believe that we are amidst a financial shift that is going to affect everybody. And the more educated you are, the more prepared you're going to be. Because at the end of it all, you have kind of two outcomes. Some people think that we're going to have Armageddon and the end of the world. Other people, they look at it as, we're humans. We always try to figure out a way to survive, and we're going to survive this as well. We continue to do that. It's what we've done for thousands of years. But the educated ones are the ones that are going to be able to help pick up the pieces, take advantage of the opportunities, and help those around us that are struggling. So that's kind of where this podcast comes from. A lot of the resources that we put online is to educate you. And it's not to educate you as far as having more money, having a better rate of return, having more certainty, but it's educating you so you're more aware. And if you're more aware, you're going to think different and you're going to act different. And when these opportunities present themselves, they're not going to just pass you by, because how many things pass you by during the day? Okay, thoughts that you could have had, opportunities that you could have had, relationships you could have fostered. But because the mindset is, just focus on one or two very mundane, repetitive, routine things, your mind's not open. If it's not open, you're not able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, and really our mind is only able to focus on a few things. I love
at the same time. Yeah.
I love kind of the thought example of, like if you're going to go buy a new car, last time you bought a new car, as soon as you started to hone in and dial in on what you were going to buy, you started to see them everywhere. Right? And they were there the whole time, but as soon as your mind is focused on that, you're like, oh, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And that's what we're trying to do with people is show them, bring some of these ideas to the forefront so that they start recognizing those patterns or those manifestations in their own financial life and in the world around them.
Yep.
So really, it does make a big difference to just call attention to some of this stuff. I'm excited for what we're gonna hit on today, and what we've been hitting on, especially over the last few months, is calling attention to these things that have been there the whole time, but because our mind hasn't been able to see them, we haven't been able to do anything about it.
Yeah, the words have existed, right, in a specific context, but the words are going to mean whatever your context says they mean. And for most people, when you talk about inflation, when you talk about taxes, and you talk about fees, which are these three wealth destroyers that we've been talking about for the last couple of months, you hear that, and most people understand what the words are, but they only relate to them given their specific context. So today we're going to well, the last little bit we've been trying to shift this context. So I did a video. First off, we did a summit. We called it the Cash Flow Wealth Summit. And it was free, and we only have, how many more days do we have? We have like 10 days left.
We're coming to the end of it, yeah.
Yeah, so we did this live. It was a 2-day conference. We had incredible speakers: Kim Kiyosaki, Ken McElroy, a lot of other famous individuals, real estate professionals, business professionals, and we recorded it, and we put those recordings on kind of an on-demand website. So you can go visit cashflowwealthsummit.com, register for free, and access all of these videos for free. And there is some really cool material on there. There's downloads, there's access to websites and education and a few other things. So definitely check that out. But the point of me bringing that up is I started in my presentation on the Cash Flow Wealth Summit. I talked about these 3 ideas of wealth destroyers, and I basically took that concept and created a YouTube video out of it, and we posted that YouTube, I think, probably last week or so. So go check that out on our YouTube channel or on our social media page. But that's what we're going to kind of get into today. So the first thing I wanted to do is we had one of our listeners emailed us through Facebook, and had a really good question when it came to these 3 wealth destroyers, which is there anything other than real estate that I could use or be in that will help me avoid these 3 wealth destroyers? Okay, so we're going to get into that topic and answer this question by Johnny. But first, let's get into what they are, just to create a good foundation of context, and then get into answering the questions. I know you prepared a few things for today, and I prepared a few things for today, and we'll get into those at the end. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay, so 3 wealth destroyers. Let's first talk about taxes. Okay, so taxes. What is a tax? Let's just talk plain and simple. What isn't a tax?
Well, yeah, what isn't taxed? We pay taxes on so many different levels. Our main focus is an income tax, which comes out of any time we realize a gain in our financial life. We pay a portion of that to either a state, a municipality, or the federal government, right, in the form of a payment. I don't even know what a tax is. I mean, why is it even there? But
yeah,
it's hard to justify it from my standpoint.
Yeah, it is hard to justify. But yeah, all a tax is basically taking your money and funding some sort of government, this, that, or the other, which in a sense pays for a good or a service that the free market does not take care of.
Sure.
So in other words, police department, the army,
right.
your seriously, I'm like thinking gasoline. Okay, why are we taxed on gasoline? Okay, it goes to who? Who knows? There's so many taxes.
Yeah, sales taxes, and the list you sent us. I think we talked about this podcast before. There's hundreds of
dozens and dozens and dozens of different taxes. Who in the world knows where they go? But at the end of the day, we pay tax on a lot. But we have a good friend, Tom Wheelwright, that basically wrote a book that gives a guide map on how not to pay taxes. Yep. And what it is, it's not necessarily meaning you don't file a tax return and you do something unethical or illegal. Right. It's basically saying the tax code gives you the specific things that you can do to not pay taxes. Okay, which says if you pay for something like this, you don't have to pay tax on that. If you pay for something like this, you don't have to pay taxes on that. So the more you know about the tax code, And my advice is not to go and try to figure out the tax code. It's to find somebody that knows it and follow their advice.
Somebody like Tom who likes reading.
Yeah,
the
and
tax
his book,
code
he
and
actually,
exciting about it
because he charges quite a bit for his consultations, and his company charges quite a bit. But you can just read the book, and they have a lot of online tutorials and e-learning that give basically tax advice and what you can do to not pay taxes. So the idea is taxes is a destroyer of wealth, because if you are making money and it's being taken away from you, that's money that you're never going to be able to use again. So if you can figure out a way to earn money and make money and not have it taxed as much, that's more money in your pocket that you can now take and use, invest, etc.
Yeah, and the big focus there, I can't help you avoid gasoline tax unless you maybe buy an electric vehicle or something, but it's really focused on income tax. That's the one we have the most. That's the tax we have the most control over.
Gasoline tax is if you own a business and you operate your vehicle as part of your business, whether it's operating or travel, etc., you can now, there's different ways you can write off miles, or you can write off all expenses associated with the car. Just depends on what the nature of the business is and how much you use the vehicle. But even a gasoline tax, you're going to pay the gasoline tax, but all the expenses associated with the car can essentially be part of a pre-tax and not have to be taxed.
Yeah, so it's whether you're paying some of those taxes with pre-tax money or post-tax money, right?
Exactly.
And
you're
if
not going to avoid the tax.
Right. And then the other thing to think about there is learning to know how our income is taxed, so the money that we're making day to day as we exchange our time for money, as well as focusing on how our assets produce income and how that's taxed. Because our assets are kind of like workers for us, out there generating additional dollars for us, and there's kind of two approaches to it. It's how is my income earned and taxed, and then how are my assets taxed, and what investments are there. So
okay, all right. So taxes. There's a way in which you can make the growth of your assets, even your income. You can use the tax code for you as opposed to it being used against you, which is, for the most part, what everybody is having to deal with right now. Yep. Okay, so taxes is the first thing. Next wealth destroyer is, and you can go in different orders. It's not like there's one that's more important than the other. They're all destroying your wealth equally. But fees. Okay, the other thing in our society is we've come to this social agreement that when we get our paycheck, we should put money into a 401k, and that money goes into Wall Street, goes to a mutual fund company, it goes to the stock exchanges. It purchases a security, which is either a bond or a stock or some other type of fractional ownership in a fund. So the idea behind doing that is you want to grow your money. Okay, money wants to compound, and you want to leverage the experts and pay those experts. Those experts are paid by charging you fees. But for the most part, fees are this black hole that nobody really knows what they're charged. There's been lots of studies done on it. And at the end of it all, the fees that are charged do not justify the earnings that are made. If you're earning 10, 12, 15% per year consistently, for sure, I'd pay it, 1% fee, 2% fee, whatever. But the lackluster gains in Wall Street do not justify the fees that are being charged.
Well, and it's also, to me, a broken system on what they charge. They are charging fees on all of the money you give them, not on how they perform, right?
Yeah.
So there's a big disconnect there too. Yep. That doesn't seem, to me, to make a lot of sense. Yep. I want to pay somebody based on what they do for me, not just how much money I give them.
Yep, exactly. But typically with these type of, you have upfront fees, upfront loads, then you have management loads over time, then you have sales loads, and all these funds have to pay taxes. Yep. Okay, but who owns the funds? The investors do. So all those taxes are passed to the person. So and people think that they have assets and securities that are tax deferred. And in a sense they do, because they don't have to pay income tax on them. But the thing is, those funds and the gains of those funds, all those taxes are passed through to the investor.
Yeah. And if you think you know what you're paying in fees, you need to do a little bit more research.
Yep.
Because whatever is disclosed to you is not the whole picture. So I don't think you'll ever really know a dollar amount of what you individually pay in fees, but you have to be aware of the impact and what's going on there. So if you're saying, oh, no, I know exactly it's disclosed right here and it's this percentage of a load or whatever it is, go out and do a little more research. It's not really what we're going to get in today, but that's not what you're paying.
Yep.
So finding and learning that is where you need to start.
And one thing to address before we get to inflation, which is kind of going to be the bulk of our conversation today, but the whole idea of fees, I think our society and our economy and entrepreneurs have really discovered that there is a flaw in Wall Street. And for instance, there was a documentary I watched that was brilliant. It talked about fraud on Wall Street. It talked about mismanagement. It talked about, the lack of fiduciary responsibility that these guys exercise because of their risky betting, gambling with American money. So it was a brilliant documentary, hit on all the points that we would have hit on a lot of the inside job points. Which is another really good documentary that if you haven't watched, you should watch. But at the end of it all, their solution wasn't an alternative strategy. It was the exact same strategy with less fees.
Yeah.
And
more regulation.
And looking at what has come about, Acorns, which is kind of a lot of Vanguard has come out and has figured out how to have securities with very low fees. Then you've had companies like Acorns and some other what are called registered investment advisories, where you give them money and they do have performance-based type of fees. Mm-hmm. And so I agree that helps solve some of the problem. But at the end of it all, Wall Street is a casino for the most part, and you're still subject to a lot of other risk. Even though you can avoid maybe one of the wealth destroyers, which is fees, you're still subjecting yourself to the other two wealth destroyers.
Well, and that's kind of where we're going to go too with inflation is even if I eliminate my fees, if I'm not generating a rate of return, my money is still being destroyed.
Yep.
So it's not just because that's part of a hang up I have with index funds is, okay, great, I got rid of a lot of the fees, but I also got rid of a lot of the return, right? And I'm not able, like I said, I took care of one of the three wealth destroyers, but the other two are still working so hard that the return left to me after being able and willing to get rid of those fees still doesn't help me. So attacking one of the three solutions isn't gonna. You've got to know what all three of them are and be able to attack all three.
You can't just attack one and think that you're saved. You're gonna have a third of your money back. No, it's not. It's not how it works. And so the video I did on YouTube is a perfect example of that, because all of the wealth destroyers, they basically wipe out at least 95% each of the potential gain, right? Yep. So it's mind-boggling just to run those numbers. But at the end of it all, looking at the market itself, I'm not saying that the stock market is bad. I'm just saying that for the most part, the buy and hold strategy just hasn't worked, and you are subjected to systematic risk. Because if the market falls, it doesn't matter if you have index funds or whatever, it falls. But for the sophisticated trader, we're good friends with Andy Tanner, who is a very successful options trader, and he understands cycles and technical analysis and fundamental analysis, and he really it's his business. So I'm not saying that it's bad all around, but for the average investor that's in a buy and hold, putting their money with Wall Street, hoping that it grows, that's where we're talking about the wealth destruction. Yeah,
and I was even reading an article just this morning by Tom Dyson from the Palm Beach Research Group, who they do a lot of this similar type stuff where they say the buy and hold, isn't it? You've got to pick strategies, and he was talking about why dividend stocks are so superior to the normal type of a strategy, because it's got that income component to it. Mm-hmm. It's got the income return is not subject to the wealth destroyers the same way buy and hold strategies are. Mm-hmm. He wasn't saying it in those terms, but that's basically what his article was working to prove out. So understanding that it's really not even the investment itself, it's how we go about buying that, and that's going to lead into this question. Real estate is so effective in mitigating all three of them, not because it's real estate, not because it's a house and a structure, but it's how we have to interact with real estate and the way we go about it. And if we can take a lot of those same ideas or that same approach to how you're forced to buy real estate into other investment areas, you're going to see similar results and similar impacts.
Yeah, because the deal with real estate, you can accomplish some very similar things with maybe a business, but real estate, it basically gives you the characteristics of all three of these wealth destroyers and completely wipes them out. And so we'll discuss that and why we don't sell real estate. No. We don't get paid by recommending anything. We don't touch that at all. But all of a lot of us, you and I have actually done some investing together. Real estate is just one of those assets that allows you to accomplish an overcoming of these three wealth destroyers. And so we'll discuss that in detail. But then I also want to answer Johnny's question about, is there anything else that could do that, which I do think that there is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of get into the inflation side of things, which is I think is the most deceptive of the wealth destroyers. We all know we're getting charged fees. Taxes are there. We know that we're gonna have to pay them. But inflation is deceptive because inflation is hidden. Because people really don't understand what it is and how it works. Yep. So let's spend maybe a few minutes. We still have a good amount of time. Let's spend a few minutes just discussing inflation in general, just so we're on the same page. I know we spent a lot of time last time doing it.
Right.
We spent some webinars talking about it, but because it is just such a profound concept that most people are oblivious to, let's really hit the nail on the head and then tell our listeners why they should care. Because most people hear inflation, they're like, inflation. But when you realize how real it is for you and how essentially money is being taken out of your pocket every single day because of inflation without you just, it's essentially robbing you. It's robbing you of the money that you sweat every single day to earn. So let's talk about just inflation basics.
Inflation basics. Can we make it basic? Where do you want to start? What do you have in mind?
Inflation basics. Come on, dude, I'm putting you on the spot.
You are putting me on the spot.
So inflation basics is, you can use it in. I always say, if you fill up a pitcher of Kool-Aid, right? So let's say your kids are going to go out and you're going to sell lemonade, right? To earn some money. Right, and they have this big pitcher of lemonade, and the instructions on the little canister of lemonade say, okay, you put these many scoops in, assuming that it's not, homemade lemonade, right? Assuming that it's artificial lemonade, they put these amount of scoops in, and the kids are like, wow, this is only one little pitcher. Why don't we just pour this one pitcher with 10 times the amount of water, right?
Without putting 10 times the amount of lemonade.
Yeah, because we'll have 10 times the amount of lemonade, right? So they do that. And now people are drinking this super diluted lemonade, right? And they're like, I want my money back. This isn't lemonade. This is like barely lemon water.
Yeah.
Right. So that's essentially is inflation, which is there are powers that the government has, the Federal Reserve has, banking has, Wall Street has, where they can essentially accomplish the exact same thing, right? They can basically create money out of nowhere and dilute the money that already exists.
Yeah, and the danger to that is, and why we're on the side that inflation does not bring about prosperity, it does not bring about any type of growth, is we measure everything in dollars. We even measure our output in dollars. And so if they can see more dollars being measured, we feel like, well, there must be more going on.
There must be growth.
But just like the lemonade, if we're not adding more flavor, if we're not adding more production,
we're not adding more scoops of powder,
then we're not any better.
Yep.
We're not any better off because we don't consume money. We don't actually want money. We want the things money can get for us.
Yep.
And if there's not more things, then none of us are better off.
Exactly. Right. So, and there's more money chasing those most things. The money you have is money you earned. Mm-hmm. The other money that's out there is money that was not earned. And that is what the deceptive part is, which is you have a government body and you have the Federal Reserve, which, is kind of a quasi government body.
It's not federal doesn't have reserves, but yeah.
Yeah, so you have these powers that are able to create this money that is chasing that finite amount of goods and essentially bidding up the price. Okay, so another example of that is, let's just look at if you own a car. Right, and you want to sell your car, but everybody in the neighborhood wants to buy your car, right? So what are you going to be able to do to the price of your car? You could say, okay, well, if everyone wants to buy it and everybody's giving me these offers, I'm just going to increase the price. Now you have fewer buyers, but you still have a lot of buyers. Okay, I'm going to increase the price even more. Okay, you're going to increase it up to the most amount that you can get for the car, but let's flip it. Okay, what if you're trying to sell your car, there's only one buyer out there? Now who's in the driver's seat?
Now he has the power.
Buyer has the power, right? Because he's going to say, you're asking that, but nobody else is willing to buy your car. So if you're desperate, then you need to lower the price. Okay, so that is the idea of bidding up. It's this idea of supply and demand, right?
Because everybody has more dollars in their wallet, they're willing to pay more of them for the same number of goods that were there before.
Yep.
But if I've got more dollars, I will give up some.
And I'll use another example is maybe, and again, I'm not trying to put any socioeconomic bias toward this, but let's look at welfare, right? What is welfare? So you have EBT cards, you have social aid, you have Medicaid, you have other local state government programs that just give money or subsidize people's living. Okay, where does that money come from? Right, it's either a tax or it's money that was basically a grant or something given by the government, which probably came from an inflated operation, which was the government essentially selling their securities to the Federal Reserve in exchange for new money, right? So that money now is increasing the amount of circulation, but the people that are spending this money didn't earn it, right? They didn't go out, they didn't get a job, they didn't produce. Now they are chasing after the same amount of goods you are and essentially bidding up the price. So now you're having to pay more than what you would have had to have paid had that program not existed.
Because more is being consumed without new things being added back in. Because the value in exchange doesn't come from the money that's there, but it comes from that you produce something and I produce something, and money just helps us exchange what we've produced and the value that we've created. And if not everybody that is exchanging in this pool is actually creating value, then it's diluting everybody's overall benefit.
So let's do a couple more examples just so we hit this home.
Okay.
And then we'll get into why it's a good thing and why it's a bad thing.
I hope it's a bad thing.
Well, it's bad. Anyway, but let's get another example. Do you have another example?
Yeah. So another thing of why we should care about this or why this hurts us is let's picture the average saver. Okay, we all know that it's wise to save and be able to afford something before we want to buy it.
Okay.
But let's take money out of it and go back to the idea that we've created something of value.
Okay.
So saving was a good idea when we could create something of value, but then wait to exchange it until we had the need for something else.
Okay.
Right. So rewind 100 years, we grow wheat during the summer, and then we save some of that stored wheat for the winter time, and then we can exchange it for a candle or something that we wanted at that point in time.
And we assumed that its value was going to be the same as it was when we stored it.
Yeah, because
or more.
Because next year growing wheat was the same thing, and we kind of know what goes into that process. But when we translated and started using money or currency, let's use currency, because really our dollar isn't money anymore. It's only currency. Now when I produce that thing and then save for the future, if new dollars have entered by the time from when I produced to when I exchange, now what I produced doesn't buy what I was hoping to get later on. So it actually makes me poor as I save that money. So it hurts those people that are the diligent ones that are setting the money aside and being responsible and taking their time to save up. They're sort of on this, it's like trying to walk up an escalator that's coming down. Yeah, you can do it, but it takes a lot more effort than even just a standing, regular staircase, because it's always headed in the opposite direction. And that's what happens to savers. And that's why there's that class of people that are better off than not, those that are not working at all, but they just never feel like they can get ahead. So they're always just one step behind. And that's because they're on that escalator going the opposite direction, because they're trying to save the little bit of value that they're able to create in society. And then every time they try to turn on exchange, it's worth a little bit less and a little bit less. And they just can never really figure out why they're never able to get ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna use one more example, then we'll get into what we can do about it. So another example is how the government operates. So the government gets money two ways, right? It gets money by selling securities, which is it goes into debt, right? So it says, China, I need $1 billion. I'll give you this note. Give me your money, and I'll pay you back at this amount of interest, right? So that's a note. So there's government. So there's bills, notes, and bonds, and so that all has to do with maturity period. So that's how they go into debt to spend money, right? Other thing they do is they tax. But when they go into debt, that's what I want to focus on. They also have a relationship with the Federal Reserve. Okay, and the relationship is the Federal Reserve will print new money and essentially give the government money through securities. And let's say the government takes that $1 billion and now they do a construction project. Okay, they do a construction project, which essentially is kind of creating something that didn't exist before, right? But they're using money that wasn't produced. They're using money that was just created. And so what that does is it cycles money into the workers' pockets, right? And those workers' pockets, again, what does that have to do with inflation? Well, the workers, now that if they're having to work for the government, okay, they are giving up another job that could have taken place by the private sector, which is money that wasn't printed, money that was actually produced. So essentially, when you've created that type of environment, now you have more jobs, more people that are producing. Okay, but it's a false sense of production because it's taking money that didn't exist before to fund it. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And then what ends up being the consequence of that, though? So
there's multiple consequences.
We
go ahead.
produce based on nothing being exchanged.
Yep.
And then when that rug is pulled out from underneath us and we realized that we spent through all this savings or this real money, things weren't actually created, that's when you have a correction and a collapse.
Well, it leads to the malinvestment,
exactly.
right? It leads to, like, look at Solyndra, right? Or look at other failed government projects, right? They're pumping money in and they're paying workers, and those workers are going out and spending and so forth, but they're creating something that is not necessarily in demand, right? Or at least it wasn't in demand enough by those that actually produced money as opposed to created it. Okay, so that's where it leads to malinvestment, like Solyndra, right? Solyndra is a great idea, but so is time travel, right? So you look at these great ideas, and do they deserve funding? Is there enough evidence there that will actually work out? Well, a person that actually saved and produced the money would be able to make a better decision and determine that risk. But if money comes from nowhere, who cares?
Yep.
It came from nowhere. There's no consequences associated with a Solyndra or another type of malinvestment going down. And that's where the correction ensues, is we have all these crappy malinvestments that occur because of this process.
And then while you're making those investments that don't turn out to be anything of value, you neglected those things that you should have done, right? The things that were currently adding to it. We said, we don't need to do that.
Yep.
And now we have to go back and spend the money where we should have, so it kind of compounds. And that's why you get such sharp falls off in the economy when these changes or this malinvestment bubbles to the surface and that rug is pulled out.
Yep.
So that up and down and why, I mean, the economy, no matter what, would always be up and down to an extent, but it would not be the wild swings we've seen that, as of just in the last 20 years. Yeah.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, so let's kind of get into the good news and the bad news. So the bad news is this isn't going to disappear. Taxes, I think Ronald Reagan said the closest thing to eternity was a government program. So the idea of taxes is who knows? It's going to take quite a bit to shift it. But chances are you're not going to be able to control that. Okay, chances are you are not going to be able to control inflation, unfortunately, right? No matter what we talk about, how we define what our philosophy is and our perspective is, the powers that actually run this system far greater than any collective power that exists elsewhere.
Well, and certainly greater than your own individual power.
Yep.
So there's nothing you as an individual can really do about it.
So a couple years ago I was on an investment event, and Robert Kiyosaki was there, and he brought up something that was pretty profound that I still think about to this day. And he's like, you know what, Ron Paul, I commend him for his efforts. I agree with some of his principles, but at the end of the day, he's not going to end the Fed, right? It's too big, too powerful, too ingrained. And it's a noble effort, but Kiyosaki said, I'm not gonna, if the Fed goes away, great, but I'm gonna be the Fed. And what he meant by that is you take advantage of what they're doing, right? And you essentially, leverage what they're doing, leverage their activity for your gain. And your gain essentially gives you power to educate more people and do real investments and make a difference in your own life and also make a difference in the lives around you. Because the more financial resources you have, the more people you're going to be able to help. So basically his premise was do what they do. So what do they do? And this is the best, kind of getting into the question by Johnny. In we'll talk about real estate first and why that is such a superior way to avoid all three wealth destroyers. Okay, but then we'll get into other ways in which you can essentially leverage the three wealth destroyers. Okay, so the first thing is that idea of leverage, right? Yep. So the biggest hedge against inflation is not gold, it's not silver, it's not a precious metal. Those markets are rigged as well, right? Now, in a physical sense, hopefully they'll come back to equilibrium. Who knows? But the pricing is not a true free market pricing in a sense. It's a rigged pricing, so it's not the best hedge. So why is debt a better hedge than gold or silver?
So debt is doing what the federal government does. We talked about this. If the federal government wants to spend something, they know they can't raise taxes by very much more, right? We're barely collecting enough taxes to just pay the interest on the debt. So the only way the government can spend is to do what? Borrow.
Print.
Right? Well, print. And somebody has to borrow.
They borrow the printed money.
Yes. So they have to borrow.
Yep.
So if we want to take advantage the same way we need to borrow the same way.
Yep.
So by borrowing somebody else's money that, again, we didn't have to work to create, we can then control the asset.
Yep.
And it's the asset that we want that's really going to help us get there. But if we can accelerate that and acquire the assets today that then are pushed up in dollar terms by inflation, we control all of that upswing with a very small amount of our own capital into it. So we're effectively doing the same thing that governments and these other institutions that benefit on the early end by getting the dollars early rather than working and waiting to get them on the back end that aren't worth as much.
Okay. So debt leverage is one of the best. And again, debt, it's one of those things that it's a conversation that you need to realize is two-sided. The first part is when person says debt is bad, typically they're referring to consumer debt.
Right.
When debt is used to acquire non-assets. Debt is used to acquire a vacation or used to acquire a boat or used to acquire a car. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about leverage and debt to acquire assets.
Well, I wish I had $1 on me to bring up since we're on video, but next time you have cash in your hand, pull out $1. Tell yourself debt is bad, and then read what it says on there.
Yep.
Federal Reserve Note.
Yep.
That currency that you're holding in your hand is debt.
Yep.
So if it's bad,
Yep.
we don't even want the currency.
Yep.
So we've got to understand that our money is different than it was. When that idea of debt is bad came out and was accurate when our money was different.
Yep.
They changed the rules, which means those ideas need to be updated for the system that we live in today.
Okay.
And that is essential.
Cool. Yes. And even, honestly, if you took out a loan to buy a car, I mean, that is also it's hedged, right? Because there's inflation and the payments you're making on a car loan, you're effectively paying less and less each year because the payment in the first year is more expensive than the payment in the second year because essentially that payment adjusts for inflation and is less valuable in the economy. But we're not going to get into the weeds on this, but debt is one of the best hedges for inflation, but when it acquires assets, it is the best hedge. Okay, so let's get into how it so the best hedge for inflation is debt. Now let's get into why real estate. So real estate is also tax efficient because of writing off interest, because of depreciation, because of all the other expenses associated with real estate. Effectively, you can pay zero tax on the income and gain because when you have a capital gain inside of real estate and you want to sell property, you can sell the property and essentially take those gains and do what's called a 1031 exchange into another property without having to pay tax. And you can continue to do that, pass on the real estate to the next generation, and they get a step up in basis.
Yeah, so there's kind of three main categories to those tax benefits with real estate. One is you get to turn post-tax expenses into pre-tax expenses. We all like to do that, and that makes sense. So we reduce taxes that way. We also get to write off things that we don't actually have to take cash out of our pocket for depreciation, right?
Yep.
We don't write a check for depreciation expense, yet it reduces our income tax.
Yep.
So that's the second one. And then the third one is we get to defer tax. So we can receive value, whether it be cash flow or appreciation, and not have to pay taxes on it now. And we can defer that. And actually with real estate, one of the only investments we can defer forever and never end up having to pay that and then pass it on. So there's those three main categories there with real estate.
Okay. The other thing too is you also have a hedge against inflation because of rents. Okay, because as money cycles through the economy, the primary expense somebody has is their housing, right? It's one of those staple things that you need in life: food, shelter, and clothing. So looking at your rent, again, it's individual. It's more money chasing after a finite amount of goods. There's only a finite amount of properties, finite amount of doors, finite amount of rentals. When you have more money chasing that, it's going to bid the price up. I have a bunch of rentals, and it's like every time I can raise rents by $25, $50. And I'm able to do that because there's more people chasing, more people demanding that because there's more dollars out there.
Yeah, and think about yourself. What is one of the first things, if you've got more money, what's one of the first things you're going to make sure is taken care of? Your housing. So one of the first things that gets bid up in our economy is housing. Mm-hmm. So we want to be on the early end of bidding up instead of the back end of things being bid up. And housing always ends up being on that early end.
Good point.
And it's also an asset that, unlike trying to store something we don't really know what we're going to exchange it for. We just know we're going to need value in the future. By putting it into an asset that is creating a value exchange right now, again, we're kind of locking in that asset is creating a way for us to exchange, and it's through that value exchange that we're protected in a sense, and it's not eaten away because that exchange is happening right now in real time rather than at some point in the future. We don't know all the variables.
That's what comes to money now, because there's cash flow now. There's not liquidity necessarily because it's tied up in equity, but essentially you have down payments that are required where it does require an initial investment, but you get cash flow now, which you can then take, save, and acquire another asset, which creates kind of the velocity of money idea. So real estate, we can keep going off on this, but for lack of time, let's maybe discuss other things that you can do other than real estate. So the idea behind real estate is that you can borrow to acquire it. There's not many assets that you can do that with. So as I listened to this question by John, or read this question by Johnny, it made me think a little bit. And so what I came to the conclusion of, my initial thoughts was, the first thing is business, right? Yep. So looking at, and this doesn't necessarily mean it's for everyone, but I have a really good client, become a really good friend of mine, and he's been successful in franchise ownership. He owns a half a dozen franchises with one company, and then four with another company. Franchises are basically proven business models. Now, you're not going to go out and buy just any old franchise. Okay, you need to obviously research it, make sure it's a reputable company. It does require down payments, but for the most part, all of the acquisition can be financed. And because of these proven business models, as long as you have decent credit, there are a lot of banks out there that are willing to lend against this type of business. So if you're borrowing, again, you're using leverage, which offsets inflation. You're acquiring a business. That business is a proven model, and then you have a cash flow associated with that, which gives you money right now. And like any other good or service, if there's inflation, most likely more money is going to be chasing finite amount of things. You're going to be able to increase the price of your services or goods because of that. So business ownership is another thing. And acquiring a franchise, it's one of those things where, is it a job? It could be. You can get a manager for it. There's some franchises out there that you can acquire, maybe work there, and then hire a manager to do eventually. But there's a lot of people that are very successful with franchise ownership, but there's a lot of people that have gone bankrupt because of it. So you have to be cautious. You have to be educated.
Yeah, but those same principles that we kind of went through, where we've got income, we've got the ability to leverage it, and then we've got the value exchange happening all the time, is existent in a business. And the added leverage you get from a business that you don't really get from real estate is you get to leverage people, right? You get a lot of people. Even if you have to work in the business, you're not the only one working there. Where your current job, you're probably the only one doing that job, right? So you get to leverage the efforts and work of other people as well to feed your system. So that's what makes business so powerful as well.
And I think the leverage of people, it all comes down to management. And what I would encourage is that's one of the tools of the wealthy, tools of the rich, is they figure out a way to manage. They figure out a way to basically round up the troops, get everybody on the same page, get them motivated, and get work done. Because one person can only do so much. When you have a team of people, it's exponential. So my recommendation is, if you don't even have enough money for a franchise, first off, you need to start putting money aside. Start being frugal, cut your expenses, save money up. Maybe in the interim, if you are not a manager at your current employer, figure out a way to become a manager. Okay, and It's one of those skills where you're not going to do it for the rest of your life with that specific company if you do go off on your own. But that's a huge skill that if you pay for training, pay for leadership skills, listen to leadership books. If we had more time, I can go off on that. But that is another huge investment, is as far as avoiding these three wealth destroyers, is education. Educating yourself not on what investment to buy, but educating yourself on who you are, how you inspire, how you manage, how you lead. And those skills, everybody has it within them. I think most human beings have within them the ability to inspire, the ability to encourage, the ability to lead. You can hone in those skills by going and doing an online course or going to a 3-day event. They're everywhere. And what that allows you to do is be more invaluable to your employer, which makes you more money. But then you can start acquiring skills there and then essentially go into, a franchise type of system or a business type of system where you find something that's valuable and you find a franchise around it. And then you have the management and leadership skills. Now you hone in the troops and you are able to obtain financing and essentially accomplish the same thing as real estate. So that's, as I was thinking about this question, that's another way to really spin it. And I think these days, look at demographics, and the biggest demographic that has literally trillions of dollars is the baby boomer generation. And there are a lot of really interesting franchises that have been really successful giving baby boomers the services that they need, mainly through healthcare and home-based services. And so that's start researching that. There's lots of different franchise newsletters and different business opportunities when it comes to that big demographic. But in order to operate those successfully, I think management, leadership, and organization needs to take precedent. That comes first.
Yep. Well, and to continue down that line, I know a lot of people would be like, well, I can't quit my job. I don't have funds to buy a franchise. I'm not going to do that. The other thing you can do is there's another type of leverage as well where you can leverage time. You could start an online business of some kind. You could put out products that don't require you to be there to sell them. You create them once and then they sell over and over and over and over. I mean, this podcast will continue to attract listeners for years to come. And we got 9 years worth of this where we did it once, and then it's up there as a digital asset that can help build and work for you while you're not working. Yep. So it can be an online business and even expand your mind one level further, where if you've got something you can sell or some service somebody will pay you to do, great. But even if you just create a platform, that's valuable, and you create readership. There are people, you said demographics, right? If you can attract 100,000 baby boomers to come and aggregate virtually on your site, that's valuable to somebody else who wants to get in front of those people. So it's not even just about a product that's going to be sold, although that's probably the first place most people could start. It's also about creating platforms. It's about organizing people and getting them together. And then that in and of itself can become valuable and something that can be leveraged where you're not spending all of your time doing it.
Well, I can't remember which book it was of his, but Donald Trump, he was talking about how he prepares for a speech, right? And when he goes and presents to somebody, what he wants to know is, what do they want? What do the people want? Why are they there? What is their self-interest? What do they want out of it? And if you start to go into relationships with that mindset, you're going to figure out ways to provide more value to people if you know exactly what they want. And that's going to give you more money, more experience, and then you can essentially leverage that to do other things. But an economy is all about supply and demand. There are people that supply, and then there are people that demand. These days, we're mostly a consumer-based economy. Everybody is consuming and demanding and demanding and demanding, and wanting to put the least amount of effort toward that. Flip it. Be the opposite. Be the one that's supplying. What are you supplying? And I would argue that taking your 401k contribution, this may be sacrilegious, but taking your 401k contribution and investing that in personal education, best investment is in yourself. Be a leader, be an inspirer, be a speaker, do public speaking courses. I mean, there's so many ways in which you can optimize your skills and be more valuable. And then whatever you do, whether it's real estate or whether it's a business, if you can be the best at doing that, you're going to be as successful at whatever you do. So I would say that if you're looking for opportunity, you don't want to do real estate, you don't want to do a franchise, I would say take all of your savings contribution and invest in yourself. Do speaking skills, management skills. There's a lot of different personal development courses that you can take online or in your own little city or town to optimize yourself. And that is another way in which you can avoid a lot of this. Because what we tell a lot of our clients is we don't believe in the concept of retirement. There are some people that want to stop what they're doing, But we say, unless you want to die within 5 years, we don't say that specifically, but unless you want to end your life, people are meant to be productive. People are not meant to stop. Retiring is stopping. We don't want you to stop living. Find something that's productive. Find something that takes the skills that you had throughout your entire career and use them for something that you love doing, and then you can make money at doing.
Yep.
So
let's make one quick distinction before we end.
We got two minutes left.
Do you have gold and silver?
Yeah.
So do I.
Yep.
Okay, so where does gold and silver fit into this, right? And the distinction I want to make here is we're talking about a different hedge against inflation.
Yep.
We're looking at how do we create wealth in an inflationary environment? How do we get ahead of it and add to our net worth, not just protect it? Gold and silver is fantastic. It is very important. It should be a key part of your inflation strategy, but you need to realize gold and silver will never make you money. It will protect the purchasing power that you have. So today's discussion was not about protection.
Nope.
In a game, there's offense and there's defense, right? Gold is the defensive strategy. It's to protect what you already have set aside.
Yep.
We wanted to hit on what are those things that can put us in the offensive mode and be able to create and develop and get us ahead of that curve. So we're not against gold and silver by any means. I don't think it's a bad thing. But if somebody's talking about it saying, buy gold and silver to make you rich, they don't understand inflation, right? That will protect you. You should have something protected from inflation. But you need to that's what I like about this conversation we've been having today and just the wealth destroyers in general. It's about trying to get ahead of it. It's about trying to create and develop and grow rather than just protect.
Okay, love it. Awesome. Great final comment. All right, everyone. Well, if you like what you hear, if you don't like what you hear, let us know. I mean, maybe we can reduce the rants. But let us give us your feedback. podcast@paradigmlife.net. Visit our social media outlets. We have lots of information on there. If you want to learn more about what we do and you're not a client, then we have some really cool resources online. You can register for those, look into what we do, and then just give us a call if you'd like to schedule a consultation with one of our advisors. That's it for today. See you guys next week.